So today, we're going to dive into this really fascinating court case. It's one of those stories where a clear legal right crashes right into a court's idea of what's fundamentally fair. It's got everything: concealment, a marriage that lasted less than a week, and a legal fight that makes you ask a tough question. Should someone ever be able to profit from their own lie?
It all comes down to this number: 6. That's it. That's how many days this marriage actually lasted. Not 6 years, not even 6 months. 6 days. And believe it or not, that incredibly short amount of time kicked off a legal drama that went all the way up to the Bombay High Court.
I mean, just look at how fast this all happened. They get married on May 21st, they don't even start living together until the 25th, and on that exact same day, the wife has a severe epileptic attack, revealing a condition the husband had absolutely no idea about. Just 2 days later, he calls her parents, and she's gone. The marriage was over before it ever really started.
So, of course, the husband files to have the marriage annulled, and the court agrees. It's declared null and void because of the fraudulent concealment of her epilepsy. Now, here's a super important detail. The wife never challenged that decision. She accepted that the court found the marriage was based on her deception. And that fact, it's going to become incredibly important in a minute.
Now, you'd think that with the marriage legally erased from existence, that would be the end of the story, right? Well, not even close. This is actually where the real legal battle gets started. The wife turns around and files a brand new suit against him with 3 very specific financial demands.
Okay, so here's what she asked for. First, she wanted him to pay back her family for all the wedding expenses. Second, she demanded the return of a bunch of golden articles she said her in-laws gave her as gifts. And third, and this is the one that really raises some eyebrows, she asked for permanent alimony from the man whose marriage to her was canceled because she had deceived him. All right, so the court decided to tackle the money and property claims first. Let's break down how it handled the wedding costs and this whole argument over the gold.
The first claim for wedding expenses, that got shut down pretty fast. The court basically said there's just nothing in the Hindu Marriage Act that allows someone to get their wedding costs back. It's just an expense. It's not a refundable deposit. In fact, this was so straightforward that the wife's own lawyer had to admit it in court. So claim number 1, rejected.
Now, the second claim is all about a really key legal concept called Stridhan. Basically, this is property, like jewelry or money, that's given to a woman during her marriage. The law is very clear that this stuff is her absolute property, no questions asked. So the wife argued that these golden articles were her Stridhan, and she wanted them back.
But the husband's story was completely different. He flat out denied his family ever gave her those things. He called it a mandab show, basically a theatrical display for the ceremony, implying her own family put the jewelry on her just to make a big show for the guests.
So it all boiled down to proof. What did each side have? Well, the wife had her own testimony and some wedding photos. The husband had his testimony plus the testimony of his parents, the very people who supposedly gave the gifts. And what was missing from the wife's case? The killer detail. She didn't call a single other person to back her up. Not her parents, not a wedding guest, nobody.
And that's exactly why her claim fell apart. The court laid it out very methodically. First, no witnesses. That was a massive hole in her argument. Second, the court said, look, photos don't prove who gave you something, they just prove you were wearing it. And third, the court found it pretty suspicious that she only brought up this claim for these specific valuables late in the game, calling it an afterthought. So claim number 2 was also rejected. And that brings us to the real heart of this case. The most complicated and, honestly, the most interesting question of them all: alimony. Was this woman entitled to get financial support from a man she was married to for only 6 days? A marriage that was wiped out because she hid a serious medical condition.
This put the court in a really tough spot. On one hand, the law is pretty clear. A woman can technically ask for alimony even if her marriage is annulled. But, and this is a huge but, on the other hand, the law also gives the judge discretion. It specifically says the court must look at the conduct of the parties. This is where the strict letter of the law leaves room for basic fairness. So what was the conduct the court focused on? Well, it was the very thing that blew up the marriage in the first place: the fraudulent concealment of her epilepsy. The court's logic was pretty simple. If she had been honest about this from the start, the marriage probably never would have happened at all. And that led the court to this incredibly powerful conclusion. In their judgment, they wrote that the wife was, and I quote, trying to take advantage of her own wrong or fraud. They saw her claim not as a genuine need for support, but as an attempt to harass her ex-husband and actually profit from her own lie. For the court, giving her alimony would have been like rewarding bad behavior. So, when you pull all of this together, what do you get? This case really wasn't just about reading a law and applying it. It was about looking at that law through the lens of fairness, of honesty, and of personal responsibility.
This table really sums up the court's entire thinking process perfectly. Just look at the three claims. For the wedding expenses, the court said there's simply no legal basis for it. For the Stridhan, the jewelry, it was a total failure of proof. No witnesses, no case. And finally, for the alimony, the court said, sure, you have a right to ask, but we're rejecting it because of your conduct. It's just a really clear, logical path for each and every claim.
I think the biggest takeaway here is that just because you have a legal right on paper, it doesn't mean it's a blank check. This decision sends a really loud message. Courts aren't just robots following rules. They're also there to make sure the outcome is truly just. They can and they will look at how people have behaved. In the end, honesty really matters.
And that kind of leaves us with this big, fascinating question to think about, doesn't it? This whole case forces us to wonder about the nature of law itself. Should a legal right, like the right to ask for alimony, even exist without any exceptions, especially when using that right seems to reward deceit and just feels fundamentally unfair? It's a debate that really gets to the heart of the constant tug-of-war between law and justice.